So welcome everyone. Today, the Women's Bee Group is presenting Amber Leach. Amber is the North American sales manager for Veto Pharma, and she serves as the liaison for the French-based firm and its distributors and customers in North America for Veto Pharma. She's also a beekeeper herself and the owner of Winkler Apiaries, which is a family-owned beekeeping company based in Appalachia that produces honey and wax products. And I just want to note that this is third in a series that we're having on varroa management products. If you wanted to look back at our June and July presentations, we did one with Nod apiaries on Formic Pro, and we also did one in July with Vita B on Baroxane and Apgard. So the CCBA doesn't necessarily endorse any one particular product, but Apivar is one of the ones in our varroa mite arsenal. So with that, thank you so much, Amber, for joining us. And we're going to take questions at the end in the chat, or you can come off mic at the end. So with that, I will take it away, Amber. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin, for inviting me. It's always a humbling experience when someone reaches out and asks if you'll join a Zoom meeting, just because sometimes I feel like I have imposter syndrome. I've only been keeping bees for 11 years or so, but it feels like yesterday. And I've moved different places across the country during that beekeeping journey, and every time I feel like I have started over. We started in the Midwest, kind of southern part of the US, and now we live in Colorado. And the first 3 years in Colorado, which was probably 7 years into my beekeeping journey, 6 years into my beekeeping journey, felt like my first, just because there was so much to learn. But thank you for having me. I will say that the thing that qualifies me to be here, I guess, if there was such a thing, is that I'm a beekeeper and I love bees. And I think the same is probably true of most of the people who are listening or who are watching. And then about 4 years ago, I was able to go to work for Veto Pharma, which has taken what I do and what I love and married those things together, because I came from the human side of pharmaceutical sales and was a beekeeper when this job presented itself, and kind of here we are. So I love what I do. I love the people that I get to work with, and I like the hard stuff still. I always thought that the longer I did this, the more answers I would have. And I realized the longer I do this, the more questions I have, because now I think I'm even more curious than I was 11 years ago. So thank you for having me. I want to talk a little bit today about our newest addition to the arsenal for varroa mite treatments, which is Apivar 2.0. But I also want to focus both before, during, and after, I suppose, on a couple of things that are kind of near and dear to the heartbeat of Veto Pharma, and that's testing for varroa mites. Because I don't think that it matters really what's in your arsenal for treating varroa mites if you don't know how to use that product appropriately, and if you don't know what your mite counts are. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Apivar 2.0, again, is the name of the product. And right out of the gate, the first question that I usually get is, what about original Apivar? So we have sold all of the original Apivar. Some of you will see it at some of your distributors, especially Man Lake, because they have the greatest amount of stock. But our goal is to purge all of that so that there's no cannibalization. And a lot of times newer is better in the eyes of the consumer, and we just didn't want our distributors to get stuck with a whole bunch of original Apivar when folks are coming in and kind of ignoring that for what's new and improved, if you will. So to that end, what is new? There's a new hanging system. If you've ever used Apivar and you saw the little plastic tabs at the top of the old strips, they were kind of a pain in the neck. I got lots of comments about folks who just hated that, to be honest. I didn't love it either. And I never really got a comment from someone who said this is the most revolutionary hanging system ever. So there were a couple of beekeepers specific to the commercial side of things that just were the squeaky wheel, and they really kind of spearheaded that change. So all of that to say, if you have an idea, if you have a suggestion, by all means, please send that to me, or you can send it to Veto Pharma directly, because some of the really the most impressive changes, or the coolest changes, I guess, have come from beekeepers like me and you and other folks across different niches in the industry. So the hanging system is different. We'll look at that here in a bit. The treatment period is 6 to 10 weeks. 6 weeks, the less amount of brood that you have, the better that's going to work. Our suggestion, our recommendation is for maximum efficacy is to go all the way out to 10 weeks because then you're going to get mites in more than one full cycle. So as they emerge from the brood and then go back in to under the cappings, and you're going to get that more than just one rotation. It's acting faster against varroa mites, which leads to higher efficacy. And you'll see the peak performance is going to land right around 14 days, which is different than original Apivar. We'll talk about that too. And the part that I think most people are excited about to the greatest degree is that there's no withholding period after treatment. So you don't have to wait to put your supers back on. You can do that immediately. And before, you had to wait for 2 weeks. And if you were a migratory beekeeper, if you were going in and out of pollination, or if you just had a really short season, and here in Colorado, we have a really, really short season. 2 weeks makes all the difference in the world to us. So we love the fact that now we don't have to wait 2 weeks to put our supers back on. In terms of formulation, there's still 500 milligrams per strip. It looks like there's less percentage of amitraz in each strip for the 2.0, but that's really just because the strip is longer. You're still getting 500 milligrams per strip. In original Apivar, you had one active ingredient, which is the amitraz, and then plastic powder, extruded plastic powder. And you still have those same two ingredients in the new formulation in the 2.0, but now you have a scavenger that kind of looks for moisture to help the stability of the strips. And then you have another ingredient that works as a release enhancer that causes the strips to sustain their release in the way that we've designed it to. So they're both still considered long-term release strips. So, for example, if you were going into almonds, if you were a commercial beekeeper, and I know a lot of folks in this crowd are not, but if you were, and you wanted something that would clean your bees up really, really quickly, Apivar is not going to be the one to do that. The newer, the 2.0 does work a little bit faster, which is a benefit, but it's still going to be considered a long-term release. Again, the strips are a little bit longer, and we designed that mostly because Veto Pharma is a French company, and most of the hives in Europe are date ant hives. So they're a little bit bigger than probably the hives that we're all used to working with, which is a Langstroth hive. And you can see here, excuse me, you can see here in the photo, I don't know if you can see my cursor as I share my screen, but it has a little twist tab at the top. So one of those little arms will go over the frame to the front, and one will go over the frame to the back. If you had a date ant hive and the strip just hangs down the center as it normally would. Or if you are using Langstroth hives, like most of us, there's going to be a pre-cut folding line, and there's another picture here in just a bit that'll show you exactly what that looks like. But it'll just fold over the top of your frame, and then the strip will hang down the center in the brood nest. And if you did love the little triangle insert that held it in place, and the hole, a lot of people would put like a bobby pin or just a stick from their apiary, or sometimes a toothpick. That hole does still exist. So if you loved it, you can still use that hole to help reinforce things. So here's a better look at what it would look like when it's folded over the top of your frame. And just like original Apivar, you're going to use one strip for every 5 frames of bees. So if you're running a single and you have a really full box of bees, you're going to use 2 strips, 4 strips if you're running doubles, and they're also equally full. And I get a lot of questions too about, well, what if I'm making nukes? And we just recommend 1 strip for nukes. So again, 6 weeks if there's just a little bit of brood early spring or late fall when she's either just starting to lay or she's just coming to the end of her laying for the year. 10 weeks is best, just because, you know, the same reasons that I discussed before, is you're going to get maximum coverage over more than one cycle for mite reproduction. And just like the original Apivar, if you get back into your hives after you've put the strips in there and you see that they're covered in wax or they're propolized to any degree, you can scrape that off, and that just helps to keep the molecules migrating to the surface so that it continues to get contact with the mites. So this is the visual, and this is probably my favorite marketing piece, so I wanted to go ahead and include it in this presentation. So this was at the end of August, when you should have a ton of brood in the in your hives. At least I know that in the Midwest we always did. And you can see that at about 14 days here is where you get peak performance. And if you go all the way out to the end of treatment, where the orange and the yellow lines almost touch, there really isn't a significant difference one over the other. And that was our goal. We wanted to show that it was just as stable and just as efficacious as original Apivar, but it just worked faster. And then there were a few other benefits that it brought to the table too. So a lot of times this is the piece that I get the most questions about after the fact, when folks really start to think about, I wonder if this is showing up in my honey or in my wax. So I'll preface what I'm about to say on this slide with, we never recommend that you use Apivar 2.0 with your honey supers in place, but just sheer curiosities. We wanted to know what that would look like if we decided to leave the honey supers in place, because ultimately, if it's showing up in the honey, then it's going to show up less in the wax when used appropriately. So you can see that Apivar is compared to Apivar 2.0 and Apivar 2.0, well, excuse me, Apivar 2.0 at 5 weeks, and then again at 10 weeks. And you can see that it's almost non-existent in the first group and the third group. And the reason you're seeing it here in the blue is that we started the 5-week treatment midway through so that all 3 groups would finish at the same time. So these measurements here were taken just a bit early. And it's still in the 4s, 12s, and 60 packs. And it's approved almost everywhere. And I don't think that it would affect most of this group, because there are 2 places that it's not approved. California, which I know is probably no surprise to the group, but also probably doesn't affect anyone in the group. And then Connecticut, which is kind of getting close to home, but maybe that affects some folks, maybe that it doesn't. And right now, all of our big distributors that you're used to getting your products from, they all have Apivar 2.0 on their shelves, and some of them have already started to reorder the second time around. So what does this mean for your IPM strategy? Well, first, we hope that you have an IPM strategy. And I see some folks on this call that just their very presence would lead me to believe that you've heard it at least a dozen times before, that you need to have an IPM strategy. So I just trust that you do. And like I said at the outset, it doesn't really matter what miticide you have in your arsenal, whether it's organic, whether it's synthetic, but if you're not using it correctly and you're not using it according to conditions in which it's going to find favor, and you don't know your mite loads, then you're setting your product up for failure. So part of a sustainable IPM, according to Veto Pharma, includes all of those things: to count your mites before and after treatment, adapting your strategy to the conditions that are specific to your location. I couldn't give you an IPM from Colorado that would work effectively for you guys any more than the Florida folks could give you one that would work, because Florida doesn't really have a brood break. So the words always or never, I think, are really, really, I think those are kind of scary words. So if anybody ever tells you always or never, get your advice from a different source. Make sure that you're using authorized varroa treatments in the colonies. And I know that there's a lot of stuff out there for some homemade miticides, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. And for maximum results, I know a lot of people want to do experiments. So I treated half the hive this way and half the hive this way, but for maximum results, we ask, at least for our products, and we think that it holds true for all products, but emphasize for the ones that Veto Pharma produces, that you treat every hive in the apiary at the same time. If you have different out yards and you want to do experiments and they're far enough away to where you don't have to worry about those bees drifting or reinfecting the apiary that you're treating differently, then we actually do encourage that, so you can compare it to something else. We want to make sure that you don't treat for too short of a duration, for too long of a duration, so on and so forth. And of course, renewing your wax combs. If you want to include drone comb, it's not listed here, mostly because I'm not responsible enough to use drone comb because inevitably I'll go on vacation and then create my own mite bomb or something happens. But drone combs are a really effective way to help manage varroa mites too if you have it within your capacity to monitor that in a way that allows you to get the drone comb back out. We want to make sure that you don't use Apivar more than twice a year. I know the big elephant in the room is resistance, and I'm glad to take any and all questions about that if you have those when the presentation's over. And we want to make sure that you're using them when you're not when you don't have a mite bomb, when your mite loads are low. Again, because it's a slow release product. If you have a really high mite load, if you have a 20 or 30 count, and you put a strip in there, and then you have 10 weeks before you reach peak efficacy or maximum efficacy rather, then you're setting yourself and the product up for failure. So rotate is key for managing resistance too. So that's it from the formal presentation. But I wanna share a little story with the group before I move on to something else that I have to show you, is that when we talk about appropriate use for miticides, I think that everybody thinks that they know what they are doing. And I'll share a story about myself and then another one from earlier this year. My first year in beekeeping, I used Apiguard. I started with 3 hives. All the books tell you to start with 2, but I wanted to outdo that, I guess. So I started with 3, treated with Apiguard in late September in central Indiana, and lost 2 of my hives. So for the following year and a half, at least, maybe longer than that, I was convinced that Apiguard was a terrible product, and it wasn't. I was just a terrible beekeeper. Most first-year beekeepers, I guess, fall prey to that same thing, is it seems so much easier than it really is. So when used appropriately, I think Apiguard is a great product. And I'm prefacing my follow-up story with that little tidbit because I had a state apiarist call me at the end of August, right around the same time the EAS, I guess mid-August. So right around the same time that EAS was coming to a close. So it's hot, it's humid, probably most hives are full of brood. So there's a ton of mites in there. And he called, and I tend to hold most folks in teaching positions or state apiary positions or the leadership boards for ABF and so on. I tend to hold those folks to higher standards, whether we like that or not. If we're more visible and we're more influential, then I think with great power also comes great responsibility. So when he called and he was really frustrated about the fact that he had tested Apivar, original Apivar, on I think about 12 of his hives. And he had given me numbers for beginning mite counts for 57 and 43 are the two that just really still stick out in my mind. So 57 and 43 mites per, let's just say 300 to be generous. You're still well over what thresholds are. Even if you went back to 3 and 5% thresholds as being the industry standard, those numbers are still really high. So he had treated with Apivar. Midway through, he wanted to see what efficacy looked like. So he took a measurement to see, did Apivar really work in his hive? So now he's down to one hive had a 17 and one hive had a 15, and I can't remember which one respectively. So that's still multiple times over what the threshold would be if you were going to treat with a long-term or a long-release treatment like Apivar strips. And at the end of the treatment period, the conclusion was he still had single digits, 5, 7, 9s, and he's very, very frustrated and he's in the South. So it's much warmer down there than it is here and in August, or probably in your neck of the woods in August. And it's all, the humid factors there too. So he's very frustrated that he had started with 57, 43, and in equally high numbers in the other halves. And his results after treatment, which was the treatment was appropriate in terms of length, that he still had 5, 7s, 9s, and so on. and he was quite angry, and he shared that in no uncertain terms. And I would argue the fact that Apivar actually worked really, really well in the conditions that you asked it to work in, because you asked it to work when brood was at its peak. You asked it to work when it wasn't supposed to be able to work. It wasn't designed to work that way. So I use that illustration to say that when you're treating, that you have to make sure that you're treating appropriately. The same holds true for Formic, which I use. Apiguard, I used to love Quick Strips. They smelled really noxious, but I really liked those, and they worked well because I didn't have to worry about the parameters that are set with heat and so on and so forth. So I say that because to know your hives, you have to test your mites both before and after. And Veto Pharma makes the Varroa Easy Check, which is kind of the industry standard. But if you never buy one of those, that's fine too. You can get a mason jar and number 8 hardware wire, and it'll work very similarly if you're going to do an alcohol wash, which is not only an industry standard, it's really the one that Veto Pharma uses in our own research apiary. The sugar shake or the sugar roll will work, but I want to share an article with you that does point to the fact that it still kills your bees. And I know that in hobbyist communities or hobbyist audiences, the pushback that I get the most is, well, I don't want to kill my bees. And I understand completely. But I will say the one thing that commercial beekeepers do better than we do is that they treat their approach to beekeeping like a business. Because if they're not testing for mites and then they're using the wrong miticide, then they have to replace those next year or take a loss, whether it's from pollination or for those who are really into the honey market side too, they're just losing things all across the board. And usually it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper for us to replace a package or a nuke and get a do-over in most cases. But I will say that the one thing that we could get better at as hobbyists is, rather than approach treatment with feelings, I always tell my kids, facts aren't feelings or feelings aren't facts. Rather than approach our beekeeping journey with the emotions that usually come with being just a hobbyist beekeeper, is to approach our role as the caretaker for these hives as one of more business-like. And I think that's one thing that commercial beekeepers do better than us. I don't think they do everything better than us. I do think that they do that better than us. So I want to share a video. You guys have probably seen this. If you haven't, I want to make sure that I share it. So the same, whether you're using our Varroa Easy Check or a mason jar with number 8 hardware wire, this is still a really good guideline to show you how you should use the Easy Check for maximum benefit. And you may take 2 measurements the exact same day from the exact same hive and get different mite counts. So it's not meant to be perfect. It's just meant to be to help you strategize and how you want to move forward. And it's certainly not perfect, but it is the closest thing to a scientific model that the beekeeping community has. So I want to share this with you guys.
The main objective of varroa monitoring is avoiding a critical level of infestation which can lead to colony losses. You should monitor before treatment to determine the best method, or after treatment to ensure that the treatment has been successful. Keep in mind a treated colony results in about $200 saved, and 10 colonies results in about $2,000 savings. A recent study shows that only a 3% infestation of phoretic varroa can cut honey production by as much as 28 pounds a year. Varroa Easy Check is a new labor-saving tool for beekeepers who wish to monitor mite infestation and honeybee colonies quicker, easier, and more reliably than ever before. Its innovative design is the key to Easy Check's reliability. Collected mites pass through holes in the base and sides of the filter basket. The tight-fitting lid is leak-free and easy to use. There are 2 guidelines on the basket indicating samples of 200 or 300 bees. The transparent bowl allows accurate counting and reliable sampling. The Easy Check is made from durable plastic and can be washed and reused many times, making it the most durable and affordable varroa monitoring tool available today. How to use Varroa Easy Check. First step, collect the bees. This process can make bees quite irritable. We recommend you wear protective bee clothing, including gloves. To wash the bees, you will need a winter windshield washer fluid containing alcohol or alcohol diluted with water to a 1:4 ratio. Use a product that does not foam to facilitate counting mites. For the first step, unscrew the lid and pour just enough fluid into the bowl to cover the bottom of the white basket. Choose a frame of brood and locate the queen. Isolate and protect her. You do not want to get the queen into the sample. Collect a sample of 300 bees or a minimum of 200 bees. The corresponding levels are indicated inside the white basket. To collect the bees, you can either scoop them directly from the frame into the Easy Check basket, shake the bees into a pan and then scoop them into the basket, or brush the bees from the frame into the basket. After you have collected sufficient bees and the basket is secured in the bowl, twist the lid onto the bowl and shake once to immerse the bees in the liquid to prevent them from escaping. Remove the lid and fill the washing fluid to the level indicated on the transparent bowl. Second step, separate the mites. Reinstall the lid and shake the Easy Check for 60 seconds. Shake gently to prevent foaming, which could interfere with counting the mites. You can shake the Easy Check vertically from side to side or rotate it to optimize separation. Third step, mite counting. Count the mites by looking through the transparent bowl before or after removing the basket of bees. After counting the mites, you can filter the liquid through a very fine sieve into a collecting container for future use. Consult your bee inspector, extension specialist, or vet to help you interpret the results. We suggest you check our website's Varroa Guide to learn more about the thresholds estimated for your location.
So I know that in the video, which was was filmed whenever the Varroa Easy Check came out, that Phil, the state apiarist in the video, he had said to either test before or after your treatment. And now we suggest that you test both before and after. That way you know exactly what your mite counts are. You know, did this product work for me? If it did, then you can add it to your IPM at the same time next year, assuming all things are equal, or you can see whether or not you have to move on to something different, stronger, whatever the case may be. So we suggest that you test both before and after. And I just use straight alcohol, truthfully. It's a little cheaper if you do the mixing, whether it's 1 to 4 or 2 to 4, however you want to mix it. And I generally don't have, generally don't have any foaming with the alcohol. So we also make a CO2 injector. If you're interested in the details of that, I'm glad to share it. If you're interested in the details of how to do the sugar roll or sugar shake, I'm glad to share that with Yasmin, and she can forward that on to you guys too. Those methods are out there. Most folks know about it. I just usually talk about um, the alcohol wash because I think that it's the most effective. And then to that point, for those who usually do want to do a sugar roll, I want to share this article with you that was, and I tried to share the most recent data that we have. If there's anything from 2025, then I didn't see it in my archives when I was trying to look for something for this presentation. But this particular study, which was done by some leaders in the industry, and I'm glad to share that again with Yasmin so she can forward it on to you guys. It talks about how what the results of the sugar shake are for the honeybees. You know, when we're doing an alcohol wash, we can see the effects of our own beekeeping practices immediately. We can see that those bees are dead in the alcohol, which is usually the most disturbing part. If we're using a sugar shake and we put the bees back in the hive, a lot of times they're just kind of moving around slowly, kind of like they've been stunned, which makes us feel better. And again, I'll go back to feelings and facts aren't the same thing. When you put the lid back on and you walk away, a lot of times those bees die anyway. You just don't get to see it immediately and with such what feels like such violence, the same way that you do in the alcohol wash. So we don't usually do the sugar shakes in our apiary. We don't recommend the sugar shakes. However, if it comes down to you're not going to do it at all, if you have to do an alcohol wash, then by all means do a sugar shake or a CO2 test so that you at least have a vague idea of what your mite loads look like.
Thank you so much, Amber. Okay, so we do have two questions, a question and a comment in the chat, so I'm just going to read. Dewey is asking, with the bigger tabs, should you check to make sure they are in the brood area after a week or two of use?
You mean in case they've moved, Dewey? Is that what you mean?
In case they've moved, yes, the bees have moved.
Yep, we do encourage folks to get back in there and to make sure that your strips are still in the middle of the brood nest because it's a contact miticide. The more contact that your bees or the mites have with those strips, same with Apivar. You know, if the cluster is migrated and your strips are still over here, then just move your strips.
George it has a comment. Maybe consider putting the 200 and 300 B number level in the yellow lid. He wishes it was there too. He uses the lid to scoop bees. I never noted. I have a mite check thing. I never actually noticed it on the side. You're saying it's on the side of
On
the
the inside.
plastic container. Okay, so but it's not on the lid though.
No, and I agree. We've talked about doing it a couple of different ways. If your eyes are no longer 25 like mine, the marks for the 200 to 300 are kind of white on white. So those are really hard to see, especially if you're out in the bee yard and it's a bright day and it's glaring, or maybe you have to wear your readers like I do and you can't see anyway. So a lot of times I do just use the lid. A lot of times probably my bee counts are more than what they should be because I'm above that line, but whatever it takes for you to get your bees in that cup at the level that we've suggested is however that works for you. Sometimes I leave the basket out. I'll put the alcohol in, take the basket out, use the basket to put the bees in, and then just immerse the basket down in the alcohol. So I don't have, like I said, I don't have an always explanation for how I do it. Sometimes it changes depending on, is it about to rain and are the bees getting feisty? What kind of hurry am I in? Did I run out of alcohol? Am I using something other than alcohol? But whatever it takes to get those bees down into the liquid is what I would do.
Got it. So Walt is touching on the elephant in the room here. My understanding is that mites have developed a resistance to amitraz. From the slide presented, the amount of amitraz between the original formula and 2.0 is negligible. Why is the 2.0 version more effective, or why does it address the amitraz resistance?
So the only thing that can address the amitraz resistance is the beekeeper, truthfully. And the reason that it looks different on the charts that I showed is because there are two new ingredients in the product. One acts as a stabilizer, and one helps to help release the amitraz a little faster so that you get that peak performance at day 14. And then the other one So the Amitraz release sustainer and then a moisture scavenger. So there are two new products or two new compounds in the product itself as a whole that change the way the product is released. So that's point number one. And then back to what I said originally about the only thing that can really address resistance is the beekeeper. So there are true pockets of Amitraz resistance. We've seen that. A lot of the great researchers in this country have studied that extensively, and that data is out there almost ad nauseum. But what folks really don't talk about, in addition to that, is that in commercial operations, and I'm going to use this as a blanket statement, but I'm not trying to incriminate every commercial beekeeper that ever lived. In commercial operations, because they have considerations that are different than ours, these guys are running 10,000 to 100,000 hives in and out of California. So they have costs that we don't have: trucking, gas, employees, land, equipment, miticide treatments. I know some folks who are spending $700,000–800,000 a year on mite treatments. Those are numbers that my hobbyist brain sometimes struggles to get around. But one of the ways that they cut corners is, I stopped using sloped landing boards after my first year when I realized that's not really necessary. I had cedar boxes the first couple of years, stopped doing that because I realized that's not really necessary. But what these guys are doing is they're taking the active ingredient that they're getting in Mexico, which they're taking Amitraz. They're mixing with a carrier that's usually an oil. Sometimes it's canola oil, sometimes it's something different. And a lot of times they're towels, they're dipping shop towels in there. So the little blue shop towels, like when you change your oil, the thing that you wipe your dipstick off on. So they're mixing those shop towels in this mixture and then putting those on the hives. Sometimes they know what percentage of Amitraz those bees are getting. Sometimes they don't know what percentage of Amitraz those bees are getting. And this is kind of like the big dirty secret, almost like, the scarlet letter type secret that the commercial beekeeping side of things carries around. And I'm sure that it wouldn't be copacetic to talk about that with a whole bunch of commercial beekeepers in the room, but most of my beekeepers, and I'm so humbled by the fact that they've allowed me to come into their operations whenever I'm in almonds in California, because miticides are expensive, especially if you're running more beehives than a hobbyist would. So their big pushback is price, no matter what miticide it is, whether it's nods or, it could be Viroxin, it can be Formic Pro, it can be anything. And they're always talking about cost. It's too expensive. I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to test. I can't afford to treat. So they're always trying to find a workaround. Their way of doing that is an off-label, technically illegal use of a product because they're going to Mexico to get the active and then mixing it in a way that is really inconsistent, not only with their beekeeping peers, but with their own practices the following or the previous years. And I'll give you an example. As we were in almonds last year, February timeframe. And so these guys are usually coming in at the end of December, the very beginning of January, and they stay for a very, very short period of time because almond pollination doesn't take that long, and they want those beehives out of there so that they can also produce like cuties and halos. If bees are pollinating on cuties and halo trees, then that is what causes the seeds. So they really want these commercial beekeepers out of the almond orchards if they're going to cross over with that type of citrus. So their stay is really, really short. And when I was there in February, I talked to a beekeeper that it was a second or third generation beekeeper. He and his grandson or his nephew, I can't recall which one, had treated their bees 9 times since September. So September to February, they had treated 9 times, 1-to-1 Amitraz mixture. So with that, Amitraz comes in a jug, I think it's a liter, that's 12.5% Amitraz. And that's usually mixed with a carrier. And then again, those shop towels are put in there. And like I said, this is the big, we don't talk about Fight Club, we just don't talk about shop towels. So it's one of the things that folks don't really talk about. And when you guys as hobbyists, or when I as a hobbyist am getting my nukes and when I'm getting my packages, a lot of times those are coming out of pollination somewhere, whether it's almonds in California or citrus in Florida, sometimes Georgia. They're coming from a whole host of different places. So if you're a hobbyist beekeeper and you can get your bees locally, you can get them from a source that you know and you trust. That's ideal. If you can make splits or capture swarms, that's probably second best. But to that end, all of the data shows, and I can send this to you, Yasmin, if folks want to read up on it a little bit. There's a really great researcher out of Louisiana. His name's Frank Rakovich. He's done a ton of work on studying resistance. And like I said, there are true pockets of resistance where mites are showing mutation, which is really brought about from repeated and prolonged exposure to an active ingredient. And what Frank Frankovich's work shows is, yes, there are patterns of resistance in these mites, but if you give bees what's called a drug, or mites what's called a drug holiday, or kind of a hiatus, don't expose them to a particular miticide. In this case, it would be the active ingredient amitraz for a certain period of time. And I think that it's usually 12 to 18 months. Then you reintroduce that miticide, that your efficacy picks right back up to what you would expect it to be. Now, the caveat to that is that a lot of commercial beekeepers, and please know I'm not picking on commercial beekeepers. I think a lot of them are truly doing the best that they can given the circumstances and the products that they have at their disposal. If you're a commercial beekeeper in Florida and you want to use Apivar, you can use it year round because there's no temperature restrictions. Again, it only works on phoretic mites. So if you're in a broody season like June, July, August, you're still going to have some issues because it's a long release treatment. However, they can't really use formic under those conditions because it's pervasively hot and humid. And that's not to pick on formic. I too use formic and I love it. But commercial beekeepers, given the definition of what it is they're doing, they're almost always in a place where there is very little brood break. California, Florida, Hawaii, some of those places never really get a true brood break. So they're always in a broody season. It's always hot. It's always humid. Well, I just told you shouldn't say always. Let me rewind. It's usually hot and humid. So they're really limited as to what they can use. And many times they will favor, erroneously so, favor Apivar because there are no temperature restrictions. And while I get that thought process, they're really causing their own problems because they're not treating appropriately. And then there's another piece to the equation is the industry as a whole, the governing bodies, the EPA has not approved products as quickly as they could have to give beekeepers other options. And then there are companies like Veto Pharma who haven't been able to produce miticides quickly enough that we could present them to the EPA for possible approval. So it's this whole mix. That's a really long answer, but I think that it bears that type of airtime just because the misconception is when folks say we hear there's amitraz resistance, that most hobbyists, and when I was a hobbyist, I had no idea that this is what it was. Most hobbyists assume that it's in direct correlation to the use of Apivar. And Apivar and amitraz are often used, those words are often used interchangeably, and that's unfair to Apivar itself, because Apivar works really, really well in circumstances where you have set it up for success. If you've treated according to the package, and we always say the label is the law, if you treat according to the package and you haven't used and abused that particular active, then you're going to continue to get the efficacy that you need to make sure that your bees are overwintered safely and correctly. I know that, like I said, that's a really long answer, and please don't take my word for it. I know that it probably sounds a little biased because I do work here, but I'm glad to share all of that information with Yasmin so that she can forward it on to you because it's a really fair question. And it's after the year that we've had, anything that helps folks kind of get over the hurdles that are causing us fear. We're going into winter, and I think most folks are a little nervous about what am I supposed to do after the year that we've had last year. So I'll stop there and
Sure.
sure that
Yeah,
no one
and
has
Walt,
any
Walt
questions.
is, I think, it was just a follow-up comment, but I think you answered it. I mean, he's saying from so from Vita Pharma's viewpoint, is the mite amitraz resistance due to a misapplication by the commercial beekeepers
Mhm.
not using product as directed? Or another way of saying it, they are not applying the correct recommended dosage. And I mean, what you said about Apivar and amitraz being used interchangeably is telling. So in some of these cases, they are not really using Apivar at all. They're using amitraz
Correct.
in the with the shop towels. They're using the active ingredient, but not they're not really using Apivar. Is that what you're?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I'm not blaming all of the resistance issues on commercial beekeepers.
Have
Um,
you seen pockets of resistance? You said there are true pockets of resistance to amitraz to the active ingredient amitraz. Are there pockets of resistance? Have you heard about it in as far as hobbyists are concerned?
Usually, I'll go back to one of the things that I said at the outset. Usually, my first, second, third year hobbyist beekeepers, when they see me at a meeting like EAS or somewhere else, and they say, I used Apivar and it didn't work, I have to use myself as an N of one and assume that most first year beekeepers kind of approach things the way that I did, which was all the book says that I have mites, so I'm going to go ahead and just treat. I didn't test. I didn't know what my mite loads were. Didn't test for mites before or after. I just knew that I had mites, so I put Apigard in, and technically pretty late in fall. So the product actually failed, but only because I asked it to work in circumstances that were impossible when measured against the package labeling.
Mhm.
So most of the time, it is not my hobbyists who are seeing resistance. Most of my hobbyist failures are just true first, second, third year beekeeping mistakes,
Mhm.
or just learning how to navigate the ins and outs of beekeeping truthfully.
Mhm. Dewey has a comment here. Our revision of the tools for varroa control from the Honeybee Health Coalition, which is underway, we too are emphasizing to not do the sugar shake. Robin Underwood of Penn State University was on the publication that Amber showed, right? And you can, Amber, if you want to send a bunch of the links to the
Oh, well,
videos and the articles, I can forward them out
I'll do
after.
that.
Um, George is saying that no secret, they talk about it freely. I think they is referring to the commercial beekeepers. I think he is. Um, Tactic is what you use if you
Yeah.
are quote, smart. They are clearly doing harm and breaking the law.
Yeah.
Right. And then Walt is at yeah, so where are these pockets? So the pockets of resistance are, where are they? Like, where are these pockets of resistance for amatraz?
We've seen a few true pockets of resistance in Europe, and then yes, there are some pockets that are scattered across the US, and I'll have to narrow that down to make sure I'm giving you the right answer. But in June of this year, there was a study that came out kind of as an initial response to the massive losses that were incurred last year.
Mhm.
And that article from the USDA really, really pointed a finger. It was multifactorial in terms of kind of what happened last year. And everybody wants an answer. I want an answer. I want to know too. But there was a huge piece of that that was supposed amitraz resistance related. And I guess a week or so ago, right after the last Honeybee Health Coalition meeting, there was a new study that was published that talked about that there were similar results between hives that where APO, or excuse me, similar results between hives that had amitraz as their last form of treatment and those that hadn't. So there was nothing that narrowed it down to say, okay, the hives that had amitraz as a treatment were the ones that just looked like this smoking gun. So there were some similarities across both, but our initial pockets of resistance were found in Europe to answer that question. And if you want to know where they are in the US, I'm glad to identify those and send them over to Yasmin.
I think you did have a slide, I think talking about the residue of Apivar in the comb. Could you talk about that a little bit more? So I know we were supposed to replace our combs after two
That's
to
okay.
3 years.
Oh,
And
yep.
how long does it, I just wanted to sort of a clarification of that. How long the residue stay in the comb?
Okay. So you're wanting to see the residue slides. So you can see that after 10 weeks with Apivar 2.0, And then, and I didn't include the one for wax, but I will send you that so that you can compare that. This was residue in honey is usually more extreme because a lot of folks, especially if they're part of like Sioux honey or if they have to have their honey tested, they want to know exactly what that looks like. So I included this. I didn't include
Oh, that was
that.
in the honey, right? Okay, so that was not in the comb. Okay,
No,
right.
but we
Right.
do have data out there. It's just as innocuous as this, but this is kind of an extreme example just because we don't advocate the use of Apivar when honey supers are on.
But there's no waiting period. For 2.0, there's no waiting period.
Right.
And right, okay, that's a new feature,
Yeah.
right?
I'm glad that I'm not a first year beekeeper this year because what a way to get baptized by fire. So if you're a first or a second year beekeeper, stay really close to your mentor, stay really close to the folks in this group, ask questions, even the ones you think are the dumb questions. You never know, those might be the ones that save your beehives.
Well, this was really, really helpful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're so welcome. You're
And
welcome.
we
I hope
if we
everybody has a great overwintering season. And if I can be a resource, by all means, please feel free to reach out. You can share my contact information if you want, Yasmin, and then I'll follow up
wonderful.
with all the information that I promised. And if I forget something, please remind me and
I will do.
go
Will
back.
do. All right. Thank you so much, Amber, for your presentation tonight. Thank you for joining us, and that's wonderful. Yes, if you send everything out to me, and we'll get it out to everybody else. Thanks so much.
Yes. Thank you
All
guys.
right.
Thanks, Amber.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.